A lot of discussions these days have migrated toward gender, and while I was watching a recent video by the YouTuber ContraPoints, it occurred to me that I've never actually thought to ask, hold on a second, what even is gender in the first place? What are we all talking about? So what I'd like to do in this video is to offer my thoughts on what gender is and where it comes from, and then to examine the claims of people who claim to be non-binary or otherwise gender non-conforming. So with that being said, here's my little gender origin hypothesis, if you will. For as long as humans have been self-aware, we've repeatedly observed that, for whatever reason, biological males and biological females tend to think and behave in slightly different ways in certain areas of their lives. In fact, these differences, while relatively minor overall, were consistent enough across cultures and throughout time that we created names for these distinct sets of thoughts and behaviors that we observed, calling the biological male typical ones masculine and the biological female typical ones feminine. And we also created derivative words masculinity and femininity to refer to these sets themselves. Masculinity is the behavioral set which includes, among other things, stronger desires for competition and for a physically attractive mate. Whereas femininity is the behavioral set which includes, among other things, the stronger desire for empathy and for a mate with social resources. More recently, we've created yet another word, gender, to describe which of these behavioral sets most closely represents us and which would best summarize us as individuals. Of course, no one will be a perfect fit for either of these sets, that's just what happens when you take an average, but people do still find utility in them. So that's what I think the word gender most reasonably refers to, as well as where it came from. Now let's take a look at ideas about gender non-conforming people, and to kind of talk you through my thoughts on this front, I'd like to use the analogy of biological sex. Just an analogy, bear with me. Most people are born with either male or female genitalia. However, some people are born with various combinations of these genitals. And when this happens, we don't say that that person is a brand new sex, we say that they are a combination of the two sexes, they are intersex. In the same way, I would argue that people who identify as male in one respect and female in another are not some new gender, they are simply a combination of male and female genders, what you might call intergender, in the same manner as intersex. The problem that people like me have with people who claim to be intergender or non-binary is that a lot of them seem to only be superficially intergender, just enough to make themselves feel special or, if needed, oppressed. For example, if a woman doesn't like to dress up every single day and look feminine all the time, that's not some sort of gender deviant. That's just a normal person that is well within the range of normal feminine behavior. Now, if you are a woman who, for example, never likes to draw attention to your female figure using your clothing, that's at least an argument for being gender nonconforming, although that is just one dimension of the behavioral sets masculinity and femininity. Basically, these people seem to think that if they're not Johnny Bravo and they're not Jessica Rabbit, well, they must be some sort of gender deviant. Isn't that special? That's like if I said, well, my dick ain't as long as all them porn stars, therefore I must be intersex. Another problem that people like me have with this idea of more than two genders, and to an extent intergender, is that a lot of different genders are claimed to exist which don't appear to have any relation to male or female typical behaviors. Their traits that make them a different gender, supposedly, appear nowhere on the spectrum between average male or female behaviors. It's like if a baby was born with fully developed female genitalia, but also with arms sprouting from their head, we wouldn't say, wow, look, an entirely new sex, because those extra arms have nothing to do with the organs we classify as sex organs. It's an entirely different area of anatomy. Similarly, if you identify as non-binary because maybe you really like Harry Potter and you identify as wizard gender, or because you feel especially connected to nature so you identify as biogender, that's not gender. That's nowhere on the normal spectrum between typical male and female behavior. That's an entirely separate area of personality, and claiming that it has anything to do with gender makes you sound like a crazy person who just wants attention.